Hey folks, welcome back to another review with yours truly, Sam Healey. Today we're taking a look at this fellow right here. This one is called Soul of the Empire. It's put out by Chara Games, and the designer's name is Heath Stockburn. Now this is a incredibly asymmetric game where each faction has its own powers, has its own winning conditions, and plays completely differently. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but you get the idea that you have four different factions: the Romans, the Jews, the Christians, and the coalition forces that are coming in, the barbarian hordes that are coming in during that period of time. And so it's pretty historical, which is something that I like, and it has a biblical theme to it as well, which is another thing that I like. So we're going to go ahead and get down to the table. I'll show you how it works from a very basic perspective, then we'll have some final thoughts in just a few moments. Let's get to it. So here I have a 4-player game of Soul of the Empire set up for you. Now, Soul of the Empire is a little bit eccentric in that each faction plays completely differently, and I know that's not terribly different from other games, but each faction also has their own separate win conditions. So that's something that you don't see a whole lot, where every single faction has their own separate winning conditions. And so, usually there's some kind of track where you're trying to get points, and then there's other goals that you specifically have that'll give you more points and so forth. But every single faction has their own winning condition. Now, so first of all, the Romans over here, they simply have to capture 25 enemy units on their board, and they keep track of that on this little track right here. So whenever they defeat somebody in combat, they're going to take these people and put them over here on this track and keep track of it like that. The coalition forces over here, that are the German forces and the, the Middle Eastern forces over here, their special victory is sole occupancy of Rome and Italia. So if they can have sole occupancy, doesn't matter how many units of theirs they have in there, then they automatically win the game. Now, the Jewish faction over here, their special victory condition is that if they can have sole occupancy of the blue areas, and that will give them automatic victory as well. And then finally, the Christian faction down at the bottom there, they have a special winning condition where if they can convert 18 different models from the board, then they will have automatically won the game as well. And then finally, if any faction can get 7 objective points, they will have won the game. Most of the factions get objective points by completing these objective cards that are up here. There is one for each of the different factions. The coalition forces, as you can see, don't have objectives up here. Their objectives are out here on the board. If they can have sole occupancy in these areas over here, then they will have gained a victory point. And then if they are able to get 2 of the same, that will give them an additional objective point as well. Now, each round consists of each faction taking exactly 1 turn. And each of those turns consists of 3 different phases that each player will go through until the next person goes. So, for example, play always starts with the Romans and then proceeds clockwise around the table. Now, at the beginning of the game, everybody's going to roll and set their dice so that they can use them for different actions on the board. Dice are used for all actions. Some actions, the pips that are showing on the face of the die, do matter. Other actions, they don't matter. You just have to spend a die in order to carry out that action. But one of the things that you do have to do while you're rolling your dice is you're looking for sequences, because a sequence is going to be able to give you the number of actions that you'll be able to do. Now, a sequence can be, for example, 3, 4, 5. That is a sequence, or rather, wow, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would be a sequence. Now, if I didn't want this, I could roll it again. And then if I didn't like that roll, I could roll it again as well. And you can pick and choose, Yahtzee style, which dice you want to keep and which dice you want to roll. If you don't roll a die on the second roll, and then at the end of that second roll, you want to roll that die that you didn't roll, you can do that. So it's Yahtzee style rolling for the dice. But once you have a sequence that is set, either one in consecutive order, a run, or matching numbers. So if I had 5 5s, then that would be a sequence. If I had 3 5s, that would be a sequence, and these 2 dice would not be part of that sequence. So during your start phase, you're going to be able to do 3 different things, two or three different things. If you're the Romans, you have 3 options available to you. Some of your power cards here say that you can score them in the start phase rather than scoring them in the end phase, which is when most people are able to do that kind of thing. So you'd be able to do that. You'll also be able to play any power cards that are labeled for start phase only. And then you can also use any permanent action cards that are down here. Some of them are one-time uses. Other ones are placed down here and can be fired off at the beginning of every phase that they're fired off in. Then you're going to go into the main phase where you're going to be using your dice in order to do certain things on the board. So for example, if I want to recruit some troops, I can do that. So I'm going to use, for example, my 5 here, and that 5 does matter because then you're going to be able to recruit 5 units. Okay, so if I wanted to, I could go ahead and just place these 5 guys in whatever region I wanted to, as long as I already had occupancy there. So I'm going to go ahead and bolster up my forces over here in Rome and Italy because I know that these German factions here are really wanting to get at me. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So there is a limit, a stacking limit, if you will, for every region. You can only hold 6 units. Each faction can have 6 units maximum in each territory. So keep that in mind. So I've done my recruit action, and you know what? I'm not really happy with that. So I'm going to do another recruit action. You can do as many of these actions as you want in any order. So for my next one, I'm going to go ahead and do my 4, and I'm going to recruit again. So I get 4 units, and I'm going to go ahead and see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in there now. I'm going to have another one in there. So I am at my maximum there. So that's 6. And then down here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's about as stacked as I can possibly get it because I do want to make sure that these guys can't just swoop in and gain their victory real quick at the beginning of the game. All right, so I've recruited twice, and now I want to move some units around, or maybe I want to go ahead and do some combat. So I could do that, but let me show you what movement does. So for example, if I use this 3 for movement, I can move this one guy 3 spaces. So I could go something like 1, 2, 3, like that. Or if I wanted to, I could move him 1, I can move him 1, and I can move him 1, like that. So you have 3 movement points available to you, and you can spread them out among your forces however you see fit. So let's say I did want to go ahead and move. I'm going to put that in my spent die area. I'm going to move 1, 2, and let's see here. Let's go with 3, like this up here. There isn't a whole lot of stuff that we can do. So let's go ahead and just say that we're going to claim one of these objectives up here. Now, the claim objectives action is where the pips of one of the actions where the pips of the die don't matter. And what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to choose one of these Roman objectives that are up here at the top of each card, and I'm going to claim that one. And that simply means that's what I'm going after. And so what we're going to do is we're going to claim this Roman objective over here so that we can try to go for this. Now this says capture 2 Jewish, 1 Christian, or 3 coalition units in this turn. And that's going to give me 1 objective point. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now I'm going to initiate combat. Now the way that you win combat is by having the most power in the territory. Power is calculated by the number of value on your combat card plus the number of forces that are in your region. All right. Now, if the coalition is fighting the Romans or the Romans are fighting the Jews or any combination thereof, the highest total is the winner. But if the Christians are fighting the Jews or the Romans, the lowest power is the winner of the game. But if the coalition forces are fighting the Christians, then it goes back to highest power in the region wins the battle. So the only way that the lowest person or the lowest power wins is if the Christians are fighting the Jews or the Romans. So combat cards are simply like this. They have a number at the bottom, and then sometimes they also have special things that will happen during the course of the battle, in addition to the power that they give to your forces. These numbers are not the same with all of the different factions. So you can see here that the Jewish faction has simply 1 through 6, but some of the other factions might have 2 3s instead of a 1 and a 3, or something to that effect. So these numbers change between all of the different factions, and which numbers have special abilities on them also change. So that's another way that the factions are asymmetric. So then after each faction has chosen the combat cards that they're going to play, those combat cards are revealed. The text is carried out when it can be carried out, but first of all, we need to figure out who won the battle. So we have 1 plus 1, that's 2, 4 plus 4 is 8. The Romans definitely won the battle because the Christians were not involved, so it is the highest power that is taken into effect. And then both texts are carried out. If you lose, your opponent must move out of this territory after the combat, and that's a free move, okay? This one says, after combat is resolved, your opponent removes 1 unit from their supply or the board and places it in your captured area. So since this guy was defeated, he is going to go over here and take a place on the captured unit track. But this means that another person, either from the board or from their supply, must also come out. So we're going to go ahead and take 1 from the supply and do that like so. Now this carries out. So now the opponent must move into adjacent regions after combat. So we're going to go ahead and move here. We're going to move here, here, and we'll also move down here like that. And so now that is done, these combat cards are placed in the combat discard pile. Another caveat here about combat cards is that now you cannot use this card until you've used all of the rest of your power cards. So once you've used all of your power cards, you can take them all back up into your hand, and they're all available to you once again. And that would conclude the main phase for the Romans. Now they go into their end phase, and they can play any power cards that they have been purchased. They can purchase new power cards right now. You roll and ready your dice, which we're going to do that in just a few moments. And you can also score any claimed objectives or objective point markers. So we look up here, and it says capture 2 Jewish, 1 Christian, or 3 coalition units this turn. We did capture 2 Jewish forces this turn, so this is scored. Let's put it back into our spent dice area. We go ahead and take this card and place it down here, and then we take 1 of our units and move it 1 point on the objective point track, and that would actually end our turn. But this continues until one of the faction gets 7 points, or one of the factions has met their specific special winning condition, and they will be the winner of the game. So that's about that for Soul of the Empire. Now, there is a lot going on in this game. It seems rather daunting on the first step, but once you actually get into the crux of the game and the core mechanisms that are involved, you're really just simply moving units around, conducting combat. It's really an area control game, with the caveat being that everybody has their own winning conditions that they're shooting for, and they're also trying to score some objectives along the way, possibly pulling out a win that way. So there isn't a fixed goal in mind, except for the objective point track. Everybody else has their own agenda, so to speak, which is pretty thematic from that day and age. So I like that fact. But anyway, let's get to our pros and cons, shall we? The first pro of the game for me, I've already alluded to a little bit, and that is the fact that this is a very thematic area control game. It is not just, control as many areas as you possibly can and then, just dominate and sweep the board. That's not what you're really trying to do. It is area control because a lot of the different abilities that you're going to be able to garner from the objective cards and some of the special abilities in your power cards and so forth, they are very much involved with controlling certain areas of the board. But that's not your end goal. Your end goal is different from every different faction that you play, and each faction has its own strategy and tactics that they should employ in order to do well. And those are asymmetric. So we'll get to that in a minute. But right now, we're simply talking about how simple it is to play the game, even though it seems rather daunting on the first step in, because there's so much that you have at your ability to do, but you have to kind of pick and choose and choose the right strategy. Sometimes you choose the wrong one in your first few games, so you have to be a little bit proactive on that in other games. So we're going to go ahead and get to my second pro, and that is the asymmetry of each of the factions. They all play differently. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses. Some may have more strengths than weakness. Romans. But you have each faction plays so much differently, and I love that when games do it, because it gives you your own feel. You don't feel like some vanilla force that is out there in the middle of the board just vying for control. Hey, look at me, I'm different. No, you are different, and you want to win differently, so you're going to play differently. You're going to have different strategies, different tactics. And that really permeates the entire faction. Your power cards are different than everybody else's. Your combat cards are different from everybody else's. It's just a great thing, and I really do enjoy games that do this. So that's my second pro. My third pro of the game is component quality. Now, the reason it's my third pro and not my first or second is because I do kind of rank them. And this one is a pro because the components aren't bad. They aren't chintzy. They're good, solid wooden components. The dice, while they're not flashy, they're not custom or anything like that, they're good dice, and they're the kind of dice that I like with the rounded corners. But all of these are really good components. Not great, not groundbreaking, but they're good components. So it's a pro in my opinion, because the board looks nice. It has stark colors, and it has a difference there. The card quality is not chintzy, not great, but not chintzy either. Each of the player boards are very durable cardboard stock. So you have good components here. I like the fact that each of the different factions have their own shape of meeple and their own colors. So there's a couple of different ways going here for color blindness. Another thing on that aspect, as we talk about the board, each region has their own symbol. So there is that also to help with those that have color blindness. So that is a good thing. There was a lot of thought put into the graphic design. There's a lot of thought put into the components. I like it. So it's a pro. Now, with all that having been said, there are a couple of cons to the game. The first con is simply the rule book. And the rule book was sporadically written, or at least it feels that way. I know that some editors probably went through this and they probably pored over it, and it probably made great sense to them. But the problem with that for me is that there just was... I didn't like the layout of the rule book. Each page almost covered a couple of different things, and you'd have to flip back and forth to get all these different questions. And then the wording within, again, I'm sure it made great sense to the editors, but for me and for others that have been playing the game, in my experience, it was just not well put together. All of the information was there, I guess. Well, most of it, but it was just a slog to kind of get through and understand how everything really kind of congealed and worked together. So the rule book was really my main con with the game. Now, my second pro plays off of actually one of my cons, and that is the asymmetry of the factions. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that the game is broken or I think that it's unbalanced, because quite frankly, I didn't put as much time into this game as the designers did, and probably as the playtesters did. So I'm sure it's balanced. However, I don't have the time to play it as many times as you guys did in order to see how balanced or how everything kind of fits well together. So it really does feel like the Roman faction has a leg up on the competition. If they take out the Jews and they go right after that, and there's nothing that the Jews can do to get those people back from the captured area. Now, the Jews do have the rioters, the Gray faction. They do have these guys, but the only way they can get those guys into play is if the right power cards come up. Now, you start with one of those power cards that allows you to get these guys out on the board, but the other two that are in the deck are somewhere in that deck, and it might take forever for them to get up. And so one of the games that I played the Jewish faction, and they were annihilated by the Romans. And I had these Jewish, the gray pieces waiting to go in, but those two cards were in the bottom of my power deck. And so that's just the way it went, I guess, for that certain game. But I also had games where the other factions were really fighting against each other, and the Christians were able to just kind of move in and convert people. And, that's fine, I guess, but it introduces a good dynamic of the game, but it also treads very closely to this idea of people feeling like they didn't have a chance. And that's why it's a con here, is because when I played the Jews, I didn't feel like I had a chance. Had other people that played the coalition forces. Didn't really do it the way that they probably should have been done, but they had that feeling. They walked away from the game feeling like they didn't have a chance at winning the game. They were just kind of there as a filler. And so really that's about it for Soul of the Empire for me. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10 because I did enjoy the game. I enjoy the fact that this is a Christian-themed game that has been given modern game thought as far as the different things that you can do. It doesn't feel like an antiquated board game that you would have found back in the 70s on somebody's closet shelf. It feels like a modern game that people put modern thought into, and I like it that that's happening more often now than before in recent years, because I think it does a service to the industry. But with that being said, I think it does have some hitches, I guess you could say. Not really problems, but hitches that will take some you getting used to, some eccentricities that might be a little bit too daunting for your casual gamer. With that being said, I did enjoy the game. I liked it. I like the theme. I like the historical nature of it. I like how each faction plays completely differently. I love it when games do that. But again, it's just really close to being that daunting feeling. So all in all, 6 out of 10. I did enjoy it, but it did have some hitches for me. That is it for me for Soul of the Empire. Thanks for joining me. I do appreciate it. And we'll see you guys and gals on the flip side. Please take care.